Over the years, Walt had adapted a number of fairy tales and fables for his Laugh-O-Gram, Silly Symphony, and character-based short cartoons, and when it came time to take on the enormous artistic and financial challenge of producing the first ever feature-length animated film, he decided to use the Brothers Grimm classic Snow White. But why did he choose the story Snow White in particular as the basis for the riskiest creative endeavor of his career? According to Disney biographer Bob Thomas, as a teenager in Kansas City, Missouri, Walt saw a silent film version of the story starring Marguerite Clark, and it formed the most vivid memory of his movie-going childhood. Both the story and the storytelling power of the film, as he experienced it that day, resonated deeply with Walt, and 20 years later, he had positioned himself and his studio to do for Snow White what he had done for the fledgling animation industry and what he would later do for the amusement park: take a good thing and make it exponentially better through superior storytelling. The standard running time of a cartoon short was 8 to 9 minutes, and thus audiences had been conditioned to see animation as a diverting filler before the main event of the live-action feature. The idea of paying to see a feature-length cartoon struck critics and potential distributors as absurd. As Walt's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was being prepared to roll out to various markets, Central Press staff writer Obera H. Rawls noted in a January 12, 1938 article that industry professionals were referring to the Seven Reel animated project as Disney's folly. The anecdote was later widely picked up by newspapers across the country. But Walt had pushed ahead undaunted because he had the vision and resources to create something that he knew would forever change animation as an art form. He had built a stunningly detailed and layered animated world requiring the talents of the best artists and animators in the business, and the illusion of three-dimensional depth afforded by Disney's new multiplane camera. Still, none of that would matter without a strong story, capable of engaging the sympathies of an audience for over an hour. It also meant populating the story with characters that audiences could identify with, something that was in short supply in the original Snow White tale. Although all the characters are crucial to the plot, in terms of relatability, the story needed that Disney touch. Snow White is too innocent, the Queen is too villainous, and the Prince is too noble, plus absent for most of the action. That leaves the dwarves, who in the Brothers Grimm version are just a monolithic group with no names and no distinguishing personalities. But Walt saw their potential right away. The figures of the dwarves intrigued me, he later recalled. He tasked the story department with creating 7 distinct character types that audiences would recognize from real life and giving them names descriptive of their personalities. Among the dozens of monikers considered and rejected early on were Scrappy, Weepy, Shifty, Jumpy, Blabby, and even Snoopy. In the finished film, the individuality of each dwarf is encapsulated in his name and constantly reinforced, and their charm and humanity ultimately constitute the entertainment core of the story. To this day, it's a point of honor among Disney fans that they can rattle off those 7 names without pause: Sneezy, Sleepy, Bashful, Happy, Grumpy, Doc, and of course, Dopey. The eventual inclusion of some memorable musical numbers also added to the movie's storytelling heft, partly because they help portray a character's inner thoughts and deepest desires, and partly because the songs themselves were good enough to stay with audiences long after they left the theater. In fact, Whistle While You Work, Hi Ho, and several other songs from the soundtrack became top 10 hits, inaugurating a tradition of Disney animated films yielding music that has become a fixture in the collective cultural memory. In addition to expanding the action of a relatively brief story to accommodate the feature-length format, Walt and his writers made other critical adjustments to the original fairy tale, and maximized the story's emotive weight, like building up the relationships between Snow White and the Prince. In the Brothers Grimm story, they meet only after she's been poisoned and revived, whereas in the Disney version, the entire plot is driven by their having met and fallen in love early on. The audience's warm reception was a triumphant moment for Walt, who had successfully created an entirely new long-form storytelling vehicle capable of connecting with moviegoers on a much deeper level than anyone had thought possible for animation. It was both a vindication of Walt's grand vision for the medium and proof that he could breathe spectacular life into an old story.